So, welcome. I'm very glad to be here this evening. I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to wind up this evening, but I'm going to start right here in this chair. First of all, I'd like to just really thank my colleague, my really good friend, Dr. Tony Jones. She said some really great things about me, and in fact, I wish she would just continue on and on and on. We've done a lot of research together. We've done a lot of, we teach together. We do a lot of design and development together. And I really, really appreciate her. And so it's really my pleasure to be here this evening. I'm actually quite excited to have been invited to be the star lecturer tonight. And I have to admit that I was really a little bit surprised when Dr. Becky Sipes contacted me last year and said that she invited me to do so. And so, being the curious person that I was, because like I said, I was a little bit surprised, and I asked her lots of questions. And so she sort of explained to me, and I learned that this event is really student-driven. And so I'm humbled and honored to know that students such as yourself actually recommended me to be the speaker this evening. And so for that, like I said, I'm humbled and I'm grateful and I'm honored. I'd like to thank Dr. Ramsey, Dr. Caponegro, John, and all of the other Honors College staff for, again, inviting me and welcoming me here into this event. So anyone of you that knows me or have taken a class from me will know that I am not the stand-up lecturer type of person. I typically like to move around a lot. I like to engage students. I really like to have conversations. And that's what I wanted to do this evening. And so I had asked Dr. Cabanero if I could have a chair. And she so graciously provided me with this wonderful chair. And so this is nice. But I thought about it afterwards and I said, sitting in a chair also might be a little bit restrictive because I also tend to like to walk. I talk a lot with my hands. I like to be out about with my students. I like to engage. So she said, well, we could have like a little table here and you could have your notes. So I wasn't really sure of how this setup was going to work out, but it's pretty cool, don't you think? You know, pretty homey, looks pretty nice, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to wind up this evening, but we're going to start here with the chair. Okay, so let's see. So my speech, or I don't want to say speech, like I said, I don't typically like to lecture. I like to have conversations. And so my conversation this evening really is all about digital equity. And so I want to sort of talk about what that means to me, digital equity, and also sort of explain what some of the research says and what are the numbers. We are here at the Academy, so I have to spend some time talking about the numbers and talking about the stats. But that also helps situate my conversation so that you'll understand where I'm coming from when I talk about digital equity. So you mentioned ground rules. I have some ground rules too. And my ground rules is that if we're going to have a conversation, that means if I ask you a question, you have to respond. You have to answer. Otherwise, it becomes really quite awkward. Do I have any folks that are from teacher education in the audience this evening? Okay, so a few. So you know what I mean when I say wait time? All right, so for those of you that are not in teacher education, wait time is that strategy of when someone is teaching in a classroom and you're asking questions and you're waiting for someone to respond. And often faculty, teachers, we don't do a real good job of implementing wait time. And that means I need to give you enough time to process my question and to begin to formulate a response. And what we typically do is we ask the question and then we give the answer. Or we ask the question and then we sort of respond by trying to clarify because we think you don't understand what we're talking about. So to avoid that awkwardness, when I ask the question you guys are going to respond, right? Okay, so I thought that I would just kind of give you an example. Being a learning technology faculty, one of the things that I do often is I typically teach with slides and presentations. I like to have lots of video and audio, so I feel a little bit out of my element here because there are no slides. And my slides are typically not lots full of text and so forth, but they are images and lots of audio and things to help you understand what it is that I'm trying to say. So I thought, I don't have any slides, but what I could do is I could share an audio file. So, question number 2. How many of you are familiar with Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Oh man, quite a few of you. So you understand what I mean about the awkward wait time. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to become Ferris Bueller's economics teacher who wound up doing a terrible time when it comes to wait time. So I'm going to give you sort of an example. And hopefully all of this is going to work out, given I don't have all of my techie stuff with me. Okay? So tell me if you can hear this.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which anyone raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone?
So you get my point, right? Right. So we don't want to have that kind of awkwardness, and I'm not going to use wait time in that fashion. So let's go ahead and get down to brass tacks. I want to begin again by kind of explaining why I think this is an important issue. I want to talk about some of the numbers. I want to have you have a conversation, actually, probably amongst each other, if we have enough time at the end, to really think about what are some of the issues and what we can do to address what I consider the digital equity or the digital gap. And then hopefully by the time we leave this evening, we will have come up with some thoughts, some ideas about what we need to do about the situation, and perhaps even coming up with a call to action. And I believe that this topic is very timely. We've just come off of a week long of Martin Luther King activities. We've celebrated his legacy and, yesterday. So I think it's really timely for us to talk about equity. And typically when we talk about equity, the conversation centers around race, it centers around gender, and centers around class. And those, of course, are absolutely very critical, important issues and questions that we should grapple with. They're also very sensitive types of questions. But what I want to say to you is that there is another lens through which we can explore and talk about equity, and this has to do with technology and technology access. As I sit here, I would do better with my podium here. So digital equity really just quite simply refers to the unequal access to technology. And more specifically, as I talk today, I'm more concerned about broadband, internet broadband access. And the Consortium for the School of Networking, Copeland for short, calls equitable internet access the civil rights issue of today. That's pretty strong language. A civil rights issue, internet access. Does that make sense to you? I bet you some of you may be thinking that, I mean, are we really still talking about technology access in 2018, 2017? Don't we all have access to technology today? I mean, how many of you have one of these? Maybe the question should have been, how many of you don't have one? And if you don't have it with you today, it's probably because you left it at home or for some reason you don't know exactly where it is. But this device here has a lot of computing power. And it allows us to have a lot of access. But again, the access that I'm talking about is not equitable across the board. I actually think that you, 20-somethings for most of you, are probably in a situation or in a category of inclusion, because most of you probably do have access to broadband internet connectivity. And so I need to bring in some more technology. Sorry, to make this a little bit interactive. Can you pull out your cell phones for me? And so I actually would like you to go online on your phone, and I'm going to give you a web address. And I want you to go to this web address, and it's a little short form, and I want you to fill it out for me. The URL is not very long, so you'll be able to type this in. So it's going to be GOO, like the beginning of Google, GOO.GL / and then in all lowercase, X as in Xavier, V as in Victor, E as in Edward, the number 2, N as in Nancy, and 9, the number 9. So I'll repeat, GOO.GL / X as in Xavier, V as in Victor, E as in Edward, the number 2, N as in Nancy, and then the number 9. How are we doing? You got that? Plugging it in? Answering the questions? Okay. So I'll be able to see your responses as everybody is plugging in the information. Perfect. Continue on. Oh, that's quite interesting. I'm looking at some of the numbers. That's, again, so far, let me say that it's not unusual. It's pretty much what I expected in terms of everybody. The one thing that is a little bit different is I asked about the unlimited data plan, and that is not as comprehensive as I thought. So that's quite interesting. I'm going to come back to these numbers in a little bit later. But again, I posit that most of you fall into this category of inclusion. And so now I want us to take a look at some of the numbers historically, and some of the trends that we see happening today. So Copeland, the institution that I mentioned earlier, and the National Center for Education Statistics, that's from the federal government, and the Pew Internet Research Center, they've been collecting data on internet access for quite some time now, at least since 2000. And so what I want to talk about is our space and time today. What do these numbers say in terms of technology access, internet technology access? And then I want to sort of disaggregate the total numbers and look at it in terms of the intersection of this access in terms of race, in terms of gender, in terms of class, in terms of age, and maybe even we'll look at some things in terms of community. So first of all, young adults, college graduates, and those from high-income households. Internet usage is pretty much ubiquitous. Everybody uses internet. They have access. It's not a big problem. The percentages are really about in the high 80s in terms of access and usage. But when we look and break down the numbers, you begin to see these gaps. And the gaps are related to age, race, gender, income, education, and community. So age kind of made a lot of sense to me. Okay? Us older folks in the 64, 65 plus age group typically don't use internet a lot. They don't have access or they don't use it, 64%. But then we look at the other categories, again, 20-somethings are always 99%, not unusual, and that's exactly what this kind of data right here that I got tells me. And it's not a lot different from a technology access study that Dr. Jones and I did a few years ago. When we look at race, it's still not a big, huge difference. We see that both Hispanics and whites are right around 88%, blacks a little bit less, but 85%, so it's still pretty similar. When we look at gender, very across the board, just about the same. But income, when we look at income, and as I'm sharing these stats with you, I want you to be thinking about, again, why do you think this is occurring? And if you had an option, if you had a chance to be able to do something about it, what kinds of things could we possibly do? So income, 30,000 that's the average income of someone in the United States, in America, $30,000. And anyone that makes that amount or less, 79% have access and use internet. 79%. That's a little bit disturbing to me. If you look at the higher end, middle class and or high end, which is 75K or above, those numbers jump to the high 90s, 98%. Okay, what does that mean? Look at education. Those folks that don't even finish high school, for some reason they dropped out, they didn't get their high school diplomas. 68% access, 68% use of the internet. High school students that graduate jumps all the way to 81%, and it's not, you know, it's kind of, I would expect that those that graduate from college and or are in college would have access and they're using. So those numbers, again, jump up into the high 90s, anywhere between 94 and 98%. And when we talk about communities, we usually divide those into urban, suburban, and rural, and those are pretty much the same across the board. Rural is a little bit less, about 81%, but urban and suburban are pretty much the same. So when I looked at that, I said, those numbers, they're really not that bad. You know, high 80%, most folks are using it. We have some work to do when we look at the elderly, trying to bring them on board. We have a little bit of work to do for those lower income communities and those families. So I said, okay, I understand that. But then I wanted to look at broadband usage at home. So what I've been talking about before is it's just general access. So people are using the internet, and they're getting access, and they're doing it in a number of places. It could be in school, it could be on their jobs. If you're like me, I use it a lot at the coffee shop or different places. So wherever I get broadband, people are using. But what about when you're at home? The numbers looked a little bit differently. First of all, overall, broadband usage at home dropped down to 75%. A little bit surprising to me. And then I disaggregated the numbers again and started looking by ACE, race, gender, income, education, and community. And just, you know, I'll give you some in general. Age, pretty much the same. If you're elderly, you're not using it at home either. You're not using it anywhere, but you're definitely not using it at home. 20-somethings like here, about 77% of you have internet at home. So maybe we really needed to kind of describe exactly what home meant. But that's where the numbers are kind of falling out. When we look at race, the numbers are getting, now we're getting to see that gap a little bit wider. Hispanics, 58% use it at home, blacks, 65%, and whites, 78%. Again, broadband internet usage at home. Gender, I should probably not even talk about gender because it's always just about the same. Income, again, the gap is even wider. If you're making less than 30K or less, only 53% use internet and have this access at home. But again, if we look at higher income, 75K or above, 90s, high 90s. Everybody has it at home. So they're using the internet just pretty much all the time. They have access to the internet just about everywhere. Education is a little bit similar. If you didn't finish high school, 30%, all the way if you're in college, you're somewhere between 80 and 90%. So again, it's following pretty much the same, but I think the gaps are a little bit larger when we start looking at home. And so, does that matter? Does it matter whether your access and where you're using the internet for a variety of reasons, whether you're doing it, where you're doing it? Is it at home or elsewhere? I see some of you are nodding, yes. Some are glazed over. Some of says, who cares? Doesn't really make a difference. But I hope to show you as I continue on that it really does make a difference where you have this access. So again, it leads me back to these devices here, smartphones. The computing power that I have on this device is stronger, greater than the laptop that I had a couple years ago. It's greater and more powerful than the mainframe IBM computers that we had decades ago, computers that took up an entire room like this. And I have all of this at the access of my fingertips in this little device. And they're getting smaller, and they're bigger. This one's a little bit bigger than the one I had. But they're becoming more and more powerful by the second, so it seems. I mean, every year we're coming out with a new smartphone that does things bigger and better and greater. So I looked at the numbers in terms of smartphones. You know, who has access, who has smartphones, but doesn't have access to internet at home? And this began to really kind of make sense, because basically what folks are doing is they're accessing the internet on their phone. They're not getting broadband at home because they don't need to. They have access to a smartphone, and they can go online and do pretty much everything that they need to do. True? Maybe. Somewhat. And the reason that I say that is because I teach a lot of online classes. And that's one of the changes, innovative changes that we see happening in education across the board, whether we're talking about K-12 or in higher ed. What I need to be able to do with the internet is changing. And things that I can do on my smartphone, I can do an awful lot here, but I can't necessarily do everything if I don't have the best, fastest broadband access. So that does become an issue. And so although there's tremendous progress, I think we're at this crossroads now. It's sort of like this tipping point. Digital equity and the digital innovations, the resources that we use are requiring that all students have access to really fast, high-speed broadband. And we need to have that not only in school, but when we leave school, because teachers, faculty, professors, everyone is expecting you to use these devices and to use the internet when you're doing homework outside of the school. It's not enough to be able to come into a lab or to come into a classroom or come into this building and do the work. You need to be able to do it when you are away from school and away from these buildings. And so, as I said earlier, there are still too many low-income families, families of color, rural communities, and et cetera, that lack the broadband access at home, meaning when they're away from this school and they're away from this building, they're not able to do the same kind of work. They're not getting the same kind of experiences that we are able to do. We're in the inclusive environment. Starting in 2016, we started tracking some other kinds of information. We started asking school systems that How important is it that we address this whole digital gap or this digital equity issue? They felt that it was a problem. And in fact, 42% of the technology leaders, these are like your technology coordinators, this is the administrative and the staff, the people that are responsible for infrastructure. They're like the IT folks that we have here at the university. And 42% of them said the fact that some students don't have access to really high-speed internet at home was a problem. They felt as that it was actually their #1 priority to make sure that students had access away from the school and outside of the school. And so the question then becomes, so why is this? Why don't they have access? Come on, somebody respond to me. Why do you think some communities and some folks don't have access? Can't afford it. Big, huge reason. No way to get through the signals? I thought I had, did I see someone else's hand? Well, actually, those are the two major reasons that are quoted. Affordability, and you really can't get the signal. And I'm going to share a couple of stories with you. I was reading an article the other day, and I believe this is about a school in Chicago. And the article had a picture. There were two children, probably either elementary or middle school, and they're in front of the school building. You can tell it's a school. They're standing in front of the building. They both have smartphones. Well, cell phones. I didn't know whether they were probably smartphones. So they both have cell phones, and they're standing, and it looks like they're doing something. We don't know what, but they're obviously engaged in some kind of work on their cell phones. But they said that they noticed that they were there one day, the next day, following day, multiple days. They keep seeing these kids there. And the question is, what were they doing? Why were they there? Homework, for sure. They actually lived across the street from the school building. They couldn't have access and they couldn't get the signal there, but they could walk across the street in front of the school, and you were using the Wi-Fi from the school building. Another story, a little bit more personal. So I chuckle every time I think about this, because I'm a learning technology faculty, right? I teach online. I do all of this techie stuff that Dr. Jones mentioned, and guess where I live? I live in a rural area. I live on a place that has about 10 acres, and sometimes I say, why am I there? But I like the open space. I like that area. But in order for me to get internet access where I live, I either have to pay through the kazoo, because I would have to do satellite, and satellite is, it's very expensive. Not only is it expensive, but it doesn't work very well. So I could either do that, or I could go to where the internet is. So oftentimes I spend more time at the university working, which is really not necessarily a bad thing, but I spend more time there because I can't get the same kind of access that I need when I'm at home. Or I go to the local library, I go to a coffee shop, I go to wherever I need to go. But that's because I too am in the category of inclusive. I am able to go to where I need to go to get internet access. We have families and students and situations that they can't go for whatever reason. There could be other than, I just don't want to do my homework, that doesn't count. But there's other reasons why they physically can't wind up, maybe there is no library local to them. Maybe there is no transportation to get them to the library or to get them to some place where they can get internet. Digital equity. It's an issue and it's a concern in some situations. And so is that something that we as a group, as a society, need to be aware of or concerned about? Is that our responsibility? I've talked a lot about access at home. I talked a little bit about access at school, but I want to talk even more about schools, because we think that the schools are the place to be. We think the schools are where we're going to get this access, right? I get pretty good signal when I'm here on campus. In 2013, former President Obama had a program, and he set the goal of saying that 99% of American students, high school, need to have access to high-speed broadband internet, and schools and libraries. And he wanted that to happen within 5 years. Now, we're talking about 2013 now. He said at that point, the data said that only 40% of American public schools had access to broadband internet. 2013, that's not very long ago. And so today, where are we today? I have to say that we're pretty much there. Literally, just about virtually, I should say, not literally, but virtually 100% of schools have access to the internet. But is the internet equal? And the reason I say that is, again, we always have to disaggregate the numbers. We always have to look underneath the numbers to see what that means. Yes, every school probably does have access, internet access in that building. But does that mean every classroom has access? And what about the devices that are being used in the classrooms to access the internet? How many of those devices, what's the ratio of students to computer or to tablet that allows them to use the internet? Typically 5 to 1. It's not 1 to 1. We're thinking that we want to be there, that's the goal, that's the aim, but that's not where we are. We still have schools in some communities and some situations that, they've got laptop carts, they're in the classroom, they can check them out, they can work there. Your teacher is amazing. They are involved in really high-end levels of activities with their students. They're engaging them. They want to collaborate. They want to connect them across the world. And they get these activities set up, and guess what? Internet goes down. Right in the middle. And it's not uncommon. In fact, the teachers are somewhat frustrated because they have the ideas, they know what to do, they know what the capabilities are, but they can't implement it in their situation because the broadband internet is not sufficient for the kind of work that they want to do. And let me tell you, it's not, I don't have the exact numbers with me today, but it's more often than not. I hear about it when I'm in the field. I experience it when I'm out working with teachers in the field. It's that group, it's that other group of students and communities that don't have the same experience that you and I have. Digital equity. An issue, a concern. Today also, I want you to also think about the schools that do have really strong broadband access, and they do have all of the innovative technologies. What experience do they have versus those schools that do not? We have schools and libraries right now that have full access to computers, to tablets, to mobile devices, to online applications. They're using 3D printing. They're using artificial intelligence, augmented reality. They've got all kinds of robotics programs. These things are transforming our schools. They're transforming the educators themselves as they begin to implement these into their classrooms. Students are being changed. Their experiences that they are involved in, that they're engaged in, put them way ahead of those students that don't have these same kinds of experiences. And so again, I think the issue is digital equity. Is it an issue? Is it a concern? Is it something that we should all be thinking about? I see that happening now, but what about the future? It's only going to, I don't want to say get worse. What we do in schools, the kinds of technologies that we have access to, is only going to expand and get better. And, you know, I can't even think of what it could possibly be. I think now about when I first started at Eastern, well, at least in this position, I was a lecturer before I started full-time professor here, but that was back in 2002, I believe. And at that time, our program, our instructional educational technology program, was one of the only fully online graduate programs around in the state and in other cities and other states across the country. Now, all programs have online classes and programs that are fully online. There are some students that are taking fully online degrees, and I'm not talking about these fly-by-night institutions. I'm talking about reputable schools, the U of M's, the Michigan States, the Easterns, the Harvards, the MIT, those schools, all of them are gravitating to online because the capabilities, what we have available, is tremendous now. We're connecting people that have the expertise, the knowledge, and it doesn't matter where they are. They could be any place in the world, and students have access to that. But what it means is that they've got to have the broadband infrastructure in place to take advantage of this kind of learning environment. In the future, it's about multiple devices. You know, we all have our little smartphones, but I don't know about you. I've got a smartphone, I've got a tablet, I've got a laptop, I've got a couple laptops, I've got a desktop, I've got my smart TV. I've got all kinds of devices. And what schools are beginning to say is that we need to have enough bandwidth so that folks can use these multiple devices. I remember when I first started at Eastern also, is when I had trouble just having 2 devices and being able to access online internet and do my work. And the university recognized the need, and they have systematically gone through and upgraded the access points and updated the infrastructure to make sure that when you come into the classroom or you come into the buildings, that it doesn't matter if you have 2 devices or which device you have. All of it is going to work, and all of it is going to allow you the experience, the educational experience that your faculty or your professor is trying to make available to you. In schools, in 2016, 37% of the schools reported 1 device per student. 21% of the schools said they had 2 or more devices in use every day. In 2019, next year, 65% of schools say that they expect 2 to 3 different devices per student in their classrooms. They're going to be using those tablets and those cell phones and all kinds of other devices. All of that requires really strong broadband infrastructure and capability. So what do we think is driving all of this? I've got my thoughts. Anyone? Anyone?
It's profitable for tech companies.
Say it again, please.
It's profitable for tech companies to have a school system based upon it.
Oh, that's interesting. She said profitability, that it's profitable for them to have schools have to have this type of capabilities. And I don't know necessarily whether it's driving it, but it's definitely an important piece of the pie. It's a real important piece of the pie.
I just think ease of access. I mean, you have everything at your fingertips. You can no longer use these well. Oh, I didn't have my book today. I didn't call. Oh, I wasn't able to look it up. Look it up now.
Absolutely. And you know what I call that? In addition to access, and just having it anywhere and capabilities. I also call it technology innovation. I mentioned some of that earlier, but what I really like to call it is the Internet of Things. So we all know about the Internet of Things, right? Internet of Things, yes? Anyone don't know about the Internet of Things? Okay, so that was the same question in a different way. We either know or we don't know. How many do not know what I mean when I say Internet of Things? Okay, so we're basically talking about, I guess we could call them things or objects that have a computer, processor, or some kind of sensor embedded in the object that allows it to communicate and talk with another object or another device or to talk to the internet. Internet of Things. So what kind of things can we talk about here? Yes? Say it? Bluetooth, absolutely, that's wonderful. Bluetooth's been around for quite a while, so that's one of the earlier examples of an Internet of Things. Yes? Someone else over here?
Are there like the lots of companies that came for like ecosystems, like the Apple ecosystem, everything works together. So like my laptop talks to my tablet, so having everything you have in all places at once.
And it all talks together. You know, one really common, widely known is Siri, right? And Alexa. And now Google's into the foray of this. They all talk to each other, and they talk to the things that are in our homes, and they talk to the internet, and they all share information about us and about, you know, they just share information. Smart phones and this smart home technology. So, and I'm a fan. I'm a real big fan. I have Vivid Security. Am I still okay? Vivid security system at my home, and it's considered the Apple of the home security market. And what that allows me to do, first of all, it has a little doorbell camera. So if anyone comes to my home and they ring my doorbell, I get a picture of them right away. I know exactly who it is. It talks, I'm able to control the heat in my home, the thermostat up, down, whatever. Now, some of these, I can do it, but I said, that's a little bit too much. I'm not going there. But I have the capability of controlling just about any of the appliances in my home. I can turn on the oven, I can turn on the microwave, I can program it to start dinner at such and such a time. And this is coming more and more and more available to just about everybody. And it's because of the Internet of Things. We now have drones that communicate with the manufacturer that can take an object, to take a package and deliver it to my house and drop it on my front door. And I hear there's conversation about even allowing someone to go inside my house and drop it off. Oh, that's a little bit too much for me. But it's all because of the ability for objects to communicate with each other. Who would have ever thought that we would have self-driving cars? I mean, that's the stuff of the Jetsons of my age. You know, we used to see all of this in comic books, and it was science fiction. But all of that science fiction is coming to reality. I've seen prototypes of the flying cars. They're these little small cars, but they don't go very long distances right now, but they can go from location to the location, and you can fly to work instead of driving to work. Internet of Things. We have coats that have processors and luggage that have processors, and you can charge your phone in your coat or in your luggage. I mean, it's just amazing the innovations that are coming, and they are coming fast. What we think is just amazing right now, in a year from now, they're going to have something that's bigger and even better. Who has access to those things? Digital equity. Is it important that we all have? Should we all be privy and participate in this technology innovation? Does it matter that we happen to be born into a certain group or a certain category? Is this a social issue that we have that we should be considering, should be thinking about? And it doesn't matter whether you're in teaching or whether you're going into that particular career, because it will impact anybody no matter what type of job you have. Because you are going to be expected to be able to navigate this new technology environment when you're hired in. I remember teaching some of my students, of course this was a while ago, but I'm just going to bring this up as an example. We were talking about being able to do PowerPoint. And okay, so you know that's old technology, but still, at that point in time, I was teaching them and trying to explain to them why it was important to know how to do this, to be familiar with that particular technology. And at that time, jobs for teachers, they wanted teachers that were very tech savvy. And one of the questions, or it's part of the recruiting process, they would bring folks in and then they would ask them, okay, you're working with a team of teachers and I would need you to put together a presentation to the principal or to the school board to discuss how you're going to implement this next type of curriculum. You've got 5 minutes, here's a computer, pull it together. And the teacher that actually wound up being hired was the one that was able to do it, because they were looking for somebody with that kind of technology skill. Now, of course, PowerPoint is just one thing. Nowadays, how are you able to navigate the internet? How are you able to collaborate with your colleagues, with others in multiple locations? How are you able to be creative and create, not just consume, a variety of objects, of products, depending upon what field you're in? I was looking at something just the other day that was in the health field, and they've always had a problem with teaching med students, I don't know whether it's nurses, well, whatever field they were going in, but teaching them how to do certain things on a human body without having a human body there for them to practice on. And in the past, they've always used cadavers. But that's a little bit of a problem. But now they have created robotic bodies that simulate the human body that is so real, and it communicates with the computer and with other kinds of systems, so that when they practice, it's almost as practicing on a real person. They're getting that kind of experience. So this whole notion of technology of things is just baby steps right now. And it just I keep going back to the notion is, who has access? Who is going to be learning? Who has experience? Should we all have access? What do you think? You know, and I don't think I necessarily have all of the answers in terms of how we fix it, but I do believe that we absolutely need to be concerned. I also want to talk a little bit more about some things that are going on that is also changing education that's going to help in terms of this digital equity and this digital gap. Because a lot of this centers around who has access to education, higher education. You know, it used to be you graduate from college, you were good, you were going to be able to get a good job. That's not the case. A college degree now is the high school diploma of years ago. And who has access to higher education? But what that looks like, again, is changing with all of this online. But in 2017, Oxford University is providing free online courses, and it's through one of their one of the online platforms that was actually developed by professors at Harvard and at MIT. But they're going to make this open to everyone. Anyone that wants to learn, who wants to get this education, is going to be available for them, and it's going to be available at no cost. They've got a study that was done by Northern Virginia Community College that said actually that they're seeing better retention, better rates, pass rates, better grades, so to speak, from folks that actually take programs that don't have such a high cost. They're saying 9% higher in courses that use this open education resources. Now, of course, the researcher in me says, okay, now I need to know more than, you know, how was this study put together and so forth. But it's still, that's something to think about. In the state of California, they've allocated $5 million for the California Community Colleges system to develop something that they call Z degrees. Z degrees stands Zero Textbook Cost Degrees Pathways. So you get into a program where you're going to finish up and get a degree, and it's going to be zero cost outside of, you know, applying and being accepted into the university. There's no other extra costs that are going to be into the college, no other costs incurred. Industry leaders are also trying to get into this avenue, and when you talked about profitability, they're jumping on the bandwagon because they see dollar signs there. But Comcast, the cable network, they're actually piloting an initiative in Colorado and Illinois, also with community colleges. That's kind of interesting. Community colleges are they're developing their own little niche in terms of higher education. But anyway, any student that is receiving a Pell Grant are eligible to purchase their device, their tablets, their computers, or anything for less than $100. It's going to be a game changer. And we're not talking about just here in the States or in Europe. We're talking about all around the world. Google has a project called Project Link, and what they're working is on the infrastructure. So they're building high fiber networks in Uganda, and this is going to allow them to offer very, very low-cost internet in that country, and they're going to be spreading it out to other developing countries. So the concern is not just digital equity here, it's digital equity around the globe. In University of Cambridge, they also have a program. They're piloting a program, and this is for students that have disabilities. And I apologize. I hope I didn't offend anyone, because that is a very important category of access as well. Those students need to have the same kind of access. And so adaptive technology is also a very important part of this whole conversation and this process. But they are developing a program that will allow faculty to convert their curriculum, their content, and post this online anywhere in a variety of formats, in audio and video. And so they're being able to try to convert this and tap into the multiple different learning styles and capabilities that students have around the world. And in the U.S., this broadband internet access is very much tied into the telecommunications industry, and it's all about the money. I won't say all about the money, but they're in business to make profit. In a democratic society, they are in business to make a profit. So it goes back to the money, and what I see as the commercialization of education. How are we going to fight that? I wanted to, no, I don't, I'm going to skip over that. That's a whole nother conversation, but it's about this whole notion about net neutrality and the vote that was just taken. And all I can say is that if you leave it up to profit-making companies to do the right thing, I don't know, maybe I'm being a little skeptical here, you know? If you leave it up to them to make the decisions in terms of who has access to this fast lane of broadband, who are they going to roll it out to? Is it going to roll out to all of us, or is it going to roll out to those that have the ability to pay? I mean, I guess, I guess I'm just about finished here. I think it's clear that school systems really have to plan for robust, ubiquitous learning environments. I think it's crystal clear that we need to be concerned about how we have access in all environments, not just in schools, but in homes, everywhere. Our communities will miss a critical opportunity if the digital inequities persist beyond the schoolhouse door. And I think we risk leaving behind children that are living in our most impoverished and remote neighborhoods, and without thoughtful and really intentional strategies and policies that we put into place, I feel the inequities are really just going to continue, and they're going to grow. Digital equity really is today's educational opportunity, or equal educational opportunity. And we've got to address this challenge. We've got to support students and families and communities at this incredible tipping point in education. And so really, what are we doing? What are some things that are being doing? In terms of schools, they're beginning to equip transportation devices with broadband internet. So you're finding school buses that now have internet hotspots that allow students to do homework while they're on the school bus, because they're going to have access to the internet. The public libraries, which have been woefully underfunded, and yes, they have capabilities, but they don't have really broadband. But we're putting more money into those systems. We see that actually in all kinds of transportation. On any of the smart buses, they have access to the internet. You get on the train, on the planes now. Almost every plane that I've been on recently, traveling, has had internet access. Inequity though, because you have to pay for it. It's not free. And who can, after paying the enormous price for the flight, who's going to pay for the internet access? But that's just kind of some of the things that we're doing. You know, bottom line, I think the decisions regarding innovations and access that are becoming available now and in the future, these are decisions they must not be about exclusion, but they've got to be for inclusion, and to make sure that the education that can change a person's life, the education that can change a person's family, that can change our communities, that can change our country, society, can change the globe, has to be accessible and equitable for all. Do we have a little bit of time for some more conversation? Okay, good. So what I'd like you to do, I mean, I've talked about a lot of stuff. Some of it's kind of high end, but I want us to think about what, in your little neck of the world, what is it some of the things that we can begin to put in place, or maybe it's conversations, other conversations that we need to have to kind of address this whole digital equity, because it's real and I don't see it going away. So I want you to just kind of talk with your partner, whoever's next to you, maybe 2 or 3 of you, just for a few minutes. You know, what's your takeaway from this? What did you learn, or did you learn nothing? If that's true, put that out there either. I just want to know, what do you think? What are your thoughts? And then let's just take a couple of minutes to talk to someone next to you, and then share that with us as a group before we end our time together this evening, okay? Go ahead, just like I said, just a few minutes. People next to you. Dr. Jones, you want to come talk to me? And we can go talk to a woman. I don't know how to turn it on.
It's on one of those things.
Oh, mute. I think I'm supposed to do this one too? Or does he do that one? Yeah, I'm mic'd up to the kazoo here. Yeah. Okay, so what do you guys think?
So vast.
It's vast. It's a lot. It's really a lot to. But I think part of it is really just having initially the conversation, because the conversation. Typically, what I hear people say in my circles is that it's not a problem. They really.
It's not a problem for them.
That's right, and that's it. That is the whole problem. You know, we're in our little silos here, and we project that out into the world, and can't do it. Can't do it. So I don't know. What time is it?
It's about 8:12.
I talked much longer than I intended to.
Really interesting.
Oh, okay. I hope so.
Yeah,
Lots to
it
think
is.
about. Okay. But I know they're probably ready to get out of here, so why don't I pull everybody back together? About another minute and pull it back.
Because right now we're still talking.
They
Yeah,
are
they're
talking,
still
which is good, which is good, which is good, which is good. I was going to so what did you guys think?
Mainly talked about, I knew a lot of what you said, but
Well, good.
like I didn't realize like the impact of this. So, like, I
Yeah.
was talking about how like you take a lot for granted of what we had in school. Like, we used always constant internet all the time for everything. There would be days when the internet went out and we wouldn't even do anything because the whole lesson plan was.
That's what the lesson was, right? Yeah.
So
It's kind of it is interesting, yeah.
what we have that we don't appreciate, I guess.
And I think part of it is that we all are sort of like in our little silos here, and we think that the way we are interacting and what we have available is the way of the world.
Everyone does,
Yeah, and so if we don't do anything other than draw attention to it, so that we increase awareness, that it's a biggie. Yeah, good. So,
Especially, I was talking about like the stereotypes of intelligence in different races or communities or countries. It all boils down to what you have access to.
which it really,
So
really does.
You can't
Yes.
advance when you don't have education and you don't have technology.
Absolutely. So, whew, it's a lot. It's a big issue to tackle. So you were my dollar person,
Yeah,
all
well,
about
that's
the
what I
money.
think about.
I know, but it's so important. It is about the money.
I felt bad because I was like, this is off topic to the speech, but like, it's true.
No, it really is not off topic, because it is true. Yeah, I mean, honestly, when we start talking about money, when we bring that back into the fold, Everything is about the money.
And it's like who has like the money has the power. Especially with like a concept like the internet, because you can get a lot of knowledge and like a lot of expertise from like even job opportunities or like other sorts of like ways to make money on the internet. So people, if they can keep it from us, we can give them more money to have like little bits of that power. I was kind of thinking like net neutrality too.
Yeah, it is. It's true. And it's funny because, you know, like, there's so much of this that we could talk about some different areas. But this whole notion of, you know, the deep internet. There's the internet, and then there's a whole nother internet available that people don't know anything about. And if you don't have the knowledge or the way to access that information, it's a whole different world out there. And again, if you don't know, you don't have the money, you don't have access, it's leave folks behind. Okay, why don't we sort of come back together, and I know I've kept you here for quite a bit of time. Everybody's probably ready to get out of here. But if we could just kind of share what you would like to share, your biggest takeaway, your thoughts. We'll have a few people share out, and then we'll wrap it up. Volunteers?
Yeah, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So, like, you know, like how like the internet service, like there's like a lot of internet service providers, and they have like these monopolies, and they do like the normal stuff with the internet where they just charge people for it, and then like it's like not as equal. And like the good internet you get depends on the amount of money you have. What do you think? Do you think it's a good idea if we have public option for internet service providing?
When you say public option, meaning public free option available for anyone in terms of the internet? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that, but it goes down to how do we pay for this? And that goes back to this whole notion about the net neutrality. And I think that's what they would initially, that was the whole idea, is that not to allow the telecommunications companies dictate who has access to the different levels and speeds and access of internet. And so I just don't believe that we can leave it up to them to make those kind of decisions. It's going to have to be public policy.
Another thing that made me interesting, you know, is that both the companies like AT&T and different other foreign networks, they would talk to each other and separate their different territories and conquer different areas. Say, so-and-so area in the east has AT&T, so-and-so area in the west has only one, and you can only have that one company. And that would be the issue sometimes if like this what we talked about. We talked about more, but sometimes people don't know about it. It's just like, oh, okay, we'll just go with this one and deal with it.
Yeah. What I get from that is that the telecommunication companies, they sort of talk to each other. They sort of divide up the territories, and different organizations they take over certain territories, and some folks just don't know what's available because it's not necessarily public knowledge, and they don't necessarily have access. And that is very, very true. And in fact, where I am, when I first moved out there, Verizon was the big name in town. But I could only use Verizon. I couldn't say that, I want to use AT&T, or I couldn't use so-and-so, because they've divided up the territories like there. And I am limited to what I can get because they have already made those particular decisions. And it's everywhere. I know that on the West Coast, when we're talking about internet access, CenturyLink, I think, is a big one over in that area. AT&T is really big here in the Michigan area. So they do. I don't know how they make those decisions, but it is, I think, pre-planned in terms of who you can have access to and from what. And the level of access change. Have you thought about when you get your unlimited plan on your smartphone? It sounds really, really good. Okay, for this amount of money, I can sign up on my smartphone and have unlimited high speed, so 4 LTE data on my phone. But some of the plans, if you read the fine print, and you find out after you've already signed up for this contract, and then you've got to pay through the kazoo to try to get out of the contract. But what they do is that means unlimited high speed up until a certain amount. You go beyond that amount, and then they drop the speed back down to, sometimes it's worse than dial-up speeds. But they do that kind of thing. They play around with who they give access to. And some of it, again, like I said, I think we're going to really have to have the government involved in some of this. I mean, it's going to have to be public policy, otherwise, how are we going to make sure that it is equitable across the board? Okay. Okay. Well, I want to thank, oh, no, more, please.
I think it's interesting now, at least I've been kind of noticing it more and more, but the big name companies like Verizon and Sprint seem to be driving, or at least creating opportunities for small, like pop-up companies, which seems like maybe it's making it more accessible for people, like, because it's so expensive to pay, you know, for Verizon.
Mm-hmm.
Like we switched to a company called Total Wireless,
Mm-hmm.
so it's like a month-to-month payment plan, and you
Mm-hmm.
pay one price.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't mess with it. But it's interesting, like I think about like the net neutrality sort of like the same way, you know, if companies start to try to limit our access, is it going to create a whole nother area in the field, like where we could get internet from, so then if this company's going to start offering us what we used to have for this price. So, you know, everybody's going to leave and flood a different market.
And, you know, and that's a possibility. That's the argument that others have, is that by doing this, it's going to actually increase competition, and all of these other smaller companies are going to come up to fill the void where the larger companies feel as though it's not to their best interest to make services available.
And personally, as I was talking to Taylor here about some of the things, I think possibly that one of the greatest things that we could probably do to have more widespread access of internet and things like that to people would be, like we were talking about before with the companies that sort of have like a regional monopoly on a certain internet provider, like only certain areas can get Verizon or only certain areas can get this, you know, AT&T kind of thing. That if there were more companies that you could choose from in areas like all, you know, kind of in general, like I can have this, this, and this, that would kind of drive the competition between them, and so you get either more widespread coverage or better coverage or things like this, or lower prices, and generally just more access for more people. So
yeah,
these companies, they kind of like, when they limit the access like that, then that kind of causes people to have to, you know, like you're saying, have to choose something that they don't really want, and that they just kind of thumb a price tag on it, and then
and that's it. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Great questions. I think I've given you lots to think about. Wish I had answers for you, but you've been great. It's the end of the day, so I will say good night.
Thank you.